The first rule of flexible break time or Flexi schedule break time in TCMSV3 is to ignore break time, because Flexi work hour is calculated based on last clocking minus first clocking. By checking this option, if any break time is taken within the working hours, it will not be deducted from the total Flexi working hour. But if you still need the break time to be deducted from the total working hours, leave this option unchecked. The next option is, do you want to apply auto-end break rule when you include lunch or dinner time? If you set this option to yes, the system will apply auto-end break rule. For example, if an employee is allowed to take a 1-hour break and he is taking only 30 minutes, the remaining 30 minutes will be added to his work hour. However, by setting the time in this option, deduct total break after time in minutes. For example, when you put 0.45, it means that if an employee is allowed to take 1 hour of break, and he has taken 45 minutes out of the 60 minutes allocated to him, the balance 15 minutes will not be added to his work hour, and the total break time of 1 hour is going to be deducted from his working hour. Do you want to include lunch or dinner time into overtime hour? A yes to this option means that lunch and dinner time will be calculated in the overtime hours. For example, if a user only takes half hour of his total break time, the other half hour of the break time will be added or rewarded as his overtime hours. Do you want to exclude full lunch or dinner time if it is greater than a lot? For an example, if an employee is given an hour break, but he took 1.5 hours. Therefore, the total 1 hour of break will be deducted from his working hours. If your company decided to leave this option to none, the break time will not be deducted. However, by selecting this option, the break time will be deducted if an employee takes more than the allowed break time period. Do you want the automatic deduction to apply on total hours exceeds per day? This rule means that the company will deduct the number of hours for break time from the overtime hour. For example, if an overtime session exceeds 8 hours, and by setting this option, 1 hour of the break time that was originally not deducted from his working hour will be deducted from his overtime hour now. If you set this option to 1 hour in 9 hours, if an employee works 9 hours of flexible work hour, 1 hour of break time that was not originally deducted from his working hour will be deducted from his total working hour. Leave this rule if your company does not apply it. The next rule is a reward rule for employees who work more than an expected amount of hours. As an example, if this option is set to 1 hour and when the Flexi work hour surpasses 12 hours, the company will reward the employees with 1 hour of extra pay if they can fulfill the 12 hours of Flexi work hour. The Flexi clocking schedule overtime rules are very much similar to the daily and weekly clocking schedules. Overtime if total Flexi work hour exceeds work hour off. By setting this option to 8 hours, the employee will be rewarded with overtime pay or OT pay only after fulfilling the 8 hours of flexible work hour. In addition to that overtime calculation, but for this option, if an employee does not fulfill the 8 hours of flexible work hour, the remaining time will be displayed as short time in the attendance sheet of the employee. Differential overtime in Flexi clocking schedule is also slightly different from the differential overtime in daily and weekly clocking schedules. If you set this option to 12 hours, in accordance to the first rule of overtime, an employee will only be qualified for differential OT hours after fulfilling 8 hours of normal work as Flexi work hour and another 4 hours of overtime. Hence, any time after 12 hours of straight work including the overtime hour, the employee will be rewarded with differential overtime pay, which will be displayed in a separate column in attendance sheet. The next rule is the minimum minutes must work to qualify for overtime. By setting this option to 30 minutes, for example, the employee will only be paid and rewarded with overtime pay after fulfilling a minimum of 30 minutes overtime. Hence, if a user does 20 minutes overtime, there will not be any overtime calculation in his attendance sheet. In TCMSV3, by default the maximum number of hours allowed to claim for overtime is 24 hours. However, if your company or organization wants to limit this number to a smaller number, you can set that as you wish. By setting this number to a 4, for example, an employee will only be allowed to take a maximum 4 hours of overtime in a day. The days that you have predefined inside the clocking schedule as rest days, off days and holidays can also be selected to be calculated as overtime. which means that any working time inside these days are considered as overtime or calculated by the system as overtime in the attendance sheet.